Picture this scene. You are sitting in a dining car, gliding across the Kenyan savannah. The air conditioning is humming, a passenger next to you is charging his smartphone, and the landscape is blurring by at 120 kilometers per hour. He tells you that before this railway existed, the same journey was a grueling, dangerous 12-hour bus ride on potholed roads. Now it's a smooth 4-hour commute. But here is the strange part. If you open a Western newspaper while sitting on that very train, the story you read describes something completely different. It doesn't talk about the speed or the commerce. Instead, it screams about a trap. It frames the tracks beneath you not as infrastructure, but as the shackles of a new colonialism. There is a jarring disconnect between the tangible reality of that steel and concrete, the sheer utility of it, and the terrifying narrative being broadcast from London and Washington. It forces you to ask a question that the headlines seem desperate to avoid. If this is such a predatory nightmare, why are nations across Africa and South America lining up to sign the contracts? The answer isn't that they are naive. It's that for the first time in history, they aren't being treated as students in a classroom awaiting a lecture. They are being treated as customers in a marketplace who finally have another vendor to choose from.
That is such a powerful image. And that contrast, the one between the lived experience on the ground and the narrative we often hear, that's exactly what we want to get into today.
It's the whole reason for this deep dive, isn't it?
It is. Our mission is to really examine the evidence, specifically from Southeast Asia, which is just this hotbed of rapid modernization. We want to understand what this new vendor, China, is actually offering.
Right. This infrastructure-centric model.
Exactly. And how it's, actively accelerating economic growth in key countries. We're talking Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Laos. It's about looking at the pragmatic choices these nations are making for their own futures.
Okay, so let's unpack that model, because it feels like a really profound shift from what we've seen for, the last 70 years?
Oh, absolutely. The traditional official development assistance, or ODA, that's dominated global finance for decades, it came with a lot of baggage.
A lot of conditions, political, governance reforms, things like that.
Right. This new approach, which often falls under the umbrella of South-South cooperation, it's just operating on a completely different philosophical plane.
And the core of that philosophy seems to be, in a word, non-interference.
That's it. It's the absolute bedrock. When China engages in a development partnership, the policy is crystal clear, not imposing any political conditions. And that's not just a suggestion, it's a foundational, non-negotiable principle.
And that has to be the single biggest differentiator.
It arguably is. It means they fully respect a country's right to choose its own path, its own development model, without someone else looking over their shoulder and telling them how to run their country.
You can immediately see the appeal of that. The idea of without strings must be incredibly potent for nations that are, fiercely protective of their sovereignty.
Of course.
I mean, traditional donors often tie aid to very specific reforms. They might be noble ideas like institution building or fighting corruption, but they can feel really intrusive.
Or even counterproductive, especially if your government's main focus is just immediate, massive material development. Building a port or a power grid right now.
You need the concrete and steel first.
That's the key distinction.
Yeah.
Now, this commitment to non-interference, it isn't some new marketing slogan they cooked up. It really reflects principles that date all the way back to the 1950s.
What were those early principles?
Well, the big ones were equality, mutual benefit, and common development. And China has been very consistent in framing this engagement not as foreign aid in that old sort of paternalistic sense,
but as South cooperation.
SSC.
Exactly. The emphasis is on mutual help between developing countries. And this perspective, it comes directly from China's own experience. They realized that for them, sustained development came from sustained economic cooperation and building their own capacity, not from handouts.
So the goal is always mutual benefit, always. The idea is that their trade, their investment, their technical help, it all contributes something tangible. We're talking knowledge, specific skills, direct jobs, income. All of it is meant to build up the human and material capacity of the partner nation.
So if that's the guiding philosophy, mutual benefit, non-interference, then the mechanism to actually deliver on that promise has to be, enormous.
It has to be strategic and massive in scale. And that brings us to these signature policy moves we've seen under President Xi Jinping, which reflect a much more proactive and focused neighborhood policy.
A proactive policy built around two huge initiatives, right?
Two major interlocking initiatives that have basically reshaped the conversation around global development finance. The first, of course, is the one everyone's heard of, One Belt, One Road.
Which is now more commonly known as the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI.
Right. And it's so important to understand that this isn't just a physical network of roads and rails. It's a really sweeping vision for integrating all the economies along its path into one cohesive economic area.
And for Southeast Asia specifically, that vision is absolutely critical. It's not just about land routes heading west.
Precisely. The BRI has two main vectors. There's the land-based Silk Road Economic Belt, the SREB, which goes west across Asia, but then there's the sea-based Maritime Silk Road, or MSR.
And the MSR is what really matters for this region.
It's fundamental. It involves these huge investments in ports, in shipping lanes that go right through the South China Sea and out into the Indian Ocean. It directly connects the region to global markets and, maybe most critically, back to China's own industrial heartlands.
And the second major initiative.
The second is the establishment of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the AIIB.
Which was created to fill a pretty obvious gap, right? There just wasn't enough financing out there for a kind of infrastructure that was needed.
Not even close. The AIIB was an explicit acknowledgement of this enormous, just a massive need for investment in infrastructure capacity all across the Asia-Pacific. The numbers here are just staggering.
What kind of numbers are we talking about?
Well, one economic analysis suggested that East Asia, including the ASEAN nations, needed an extra $600 billion per year. An extra $600 billion in infrastructure investment just to meet basic growth projections. The traditional multilateral banks, they were just structurally unable to meet that scale of demand.
So the AIIB was built to be a dedicated and, I assume, more agile alternative.
That's right. And China didn't just propose these ideas in a white paper and wait. They immediately backed them with dedicated, substantial financial muscle. That's what signals the long-term intent.
And that financial commitment is what makes it all real.
It's undeniable. The overall capital they pledged to support these two initiatives totals around $100 billion US.
$100 billion.
Yeah. And that includes an initial $40 billion injection into the dedicated Silk Road Fund, the SRF, which focuses more on long-term, large-scale, private sector-oriented projects, and then another $50 billion to capitalize the AIIB.
That kind of focused financing, it just sends a very clear signal.
It signals a deep determination to actually realize this vision of, comprehensive regional connectivity and capacity building for the next generation.
It's just a magnitude of commitment that's hard to wrap your head around. But it's not just about the big banks and the big funds, is it? The model also seems to rely on very concrete, country-specific assistance.
Yes, and that's where it gets very practical. It's about providing the actual tools and the intellectual capital, not just the massive structural loans.
So what does that look like on the ground?
Well, we saw very clear policy commitments. For example, back in 2016, there was an announcement that China would commit $560 million in pure free assistance.
Oh, grants, not loans.
Exactly, grants. And that was alongside offering infrastructure loans totaling $10 billion. This kind of blended approach is crucial.
And that assistance is delivered through a few different channels, right, to give some flexibility.
Correct. The policy, which was reaffirmed in their 2014 Foreign Aid White Paper, noted that China's assistance was going to 121 countries globally. And it's dispersed through a combination of methods. You've got the grants, which require no repayment. You have interest-free loans, which are highly concessional. And then you have concessional loans, which offer below-market interest rates and really long repayment periods.
And the focus areas for that aid, where is it directed?
It's intensely practical. I mean, infrastructure is obviously a huge priority, but it extends to technical capacity building, providing necessary goods, project management expertise, and even deploying specialized technical teams.
Like medical teams, for instance.
Medical teams are a great example. It's all focused on empowering the recipient nation to manage and sustain its own development. The whole philosophy demands that the aid fosters independence, not dependence.
Let's get a bit more specific on that capacity building. If the goal is mutual help, what does that actual knowledge transfer look like?
The numbers really bear out the seriousness of the effort. If you just take a single snapshot, say between 2010 and 2013, China trained over 5,000 officials and technicians, specifically from ASEAN member countries.
And I'm guessing this wasn't just generic management training.
Not at all. It covered 11 agreed-upon priority areas that are absolutely crucial for modernization. You have to think about critical sectors like transport planning, energy infrastructure management, and the really rapid development of ICT, information and communications technology.
So you're embedding the skills locally.
That's the whole point. This hands-on focused technical transfer is essential for any nation looking to rapidly modernize. It gives them the skills they need locally to actually operate and maintain these massive projects for the long term.
That whole discussion of economic cooperation, it's a perfect lead-in to the next major area to protect, which is how this influx of philosophy and finance is actually transforming the regional economies. We're talking trade, investment, and maybe most importantly, the global value chains across Southeast Asia.
It's vital to start with just the sheer scale of China's economic footprint in the region. China isn't just, another diplomatic partner. It has become the central economic gravitational force.
And it has been for a while now.
Consistently. China has held the title of ASEAN's largest trading partner every single year since 2009.
And the trade figures themselves show this incredibly aggressive speed of integration.
They really do. Two-way trade volume hit, $366.5 billion back in 2014. But what's even more telling is the ambition. The partners agreed to a massive target of reaching $1 trillion in trade by 2020.
$1 trillion. That signals something much deeper than just a simple trade relationship.
It signals a fundamental economic interdependency. And you see that same magnitude mirrored on the investment side, too.
Right, the bilateral investment numbers.
By the end of 2014, bilateral investment between China and ASEAN was already at $126.95 billion. And you can see it in the country-specific examples. China is Indonesia's second largest trading partner, and the trade volume between them surged 4 times just between 2005 and 2012.
4 times in 7 years.
An incredible trajectory. It fundamentally changes how a nation plans its economic future.
And it seems like the stability of China as a partner, especially when the global economy gets turbulent, is a huge factor for countries like Malaysia.
Malaysia is a really compelling case study on dependability. They've officially recognized China as their largest trading partner for 14 consecutive years.
14 years.
But more critically, when the global economy saw all that volatility and other traditional sources of FDI, foreign direct investment, started to dip, China acted as a buffer. China's share of FDI into Malaysia actually peaked at 27% in 2019.
So it provided crucial investment right when it was needed most.
Exactly. It shows the relationship has this sort of counter-cyclical strength.
Now, here's where the dynamic, for me, really flips the traditional script.
Yeah.
The scale of all this trade and investment, it's actually being driven by China's own domestic economic strategy. And that, in turn, is actively generating manufacturing growth in Southeast Asia. It just challenges that old narrative that China is only a competitor to everyone in the region.
That's the key strategic transfer. Some people call it the great industry transfer. China's own economic blueprint, specifically its 12th five-year plan, had a goal to structurally strengthen its domestic market.
And how did they plan to do that?
Well, to achieve that, they needed to upgrade their own production to higher value-added goods, things like advanced technology, services. The strategic consequence of that was simple. They had to transfer the labor-intensive, lower value-added manufacturing offshore.
And what was the internal pressure on Chinese firms to make that move?
The primary driver was cost, just skyrocketing domestic costs. Chinese manufacturing firms were facing annual labor cost increases that averaged between 15 and 20%.
Wow, every year.
Every single year. That kind of sustained pressure, it just decimates your competitiveness in simple assembly and production. So this economic reality encouraged, and in some cases really forced, Chinese firms to relocate.
And they relocated to places like Vietnam, Indonesia, and Malaysia.
Exactly. Countries that offered significantly cheaper labor pools and, crucially, often provided preferential land deals and tax breaks from their own governments, who were, of course, eager to attract that investment. This confirms that this great industry transfer is a real, ongoing thing.
And these relocated factories are landing in a region that is one of the world's most dynamic and fastest-growing consumer bases. It's a perfect match.
The market opportunity is immense. Southeast Asia itself is an immediate market of over 600 million people. But the growth forecasts are even more compelling.
What are those forecasts saying?
The Asian Development Bank estimated that by 2030, the Asian middle class is going to add an astonishing 2.5 billion people.
2.5 billion new middle-class consumers.
Yes. And this new, massive consumer class is expected to increase its spending by 9% annually. So for these Chinese firms, relocating to Southeast Asia puts them in a lower cost environment, but it also puts them right at the epicenter of the future global consumer market.
This analysis just fundamentally shifts the view of China. It's not just a regional competitor anymore. It's an absolutely essential supplier.
It is the most important distinction we can make.
Right.
If you think back to the early 2000s, there was what people call the first China shock, where China was competing fiercely in low-end manufacturing, sometimes at the expense of its neighbors.
Right.
But the economic pattern we're seeing now, the second China shock, it has been overwhelmingly pro-growth for Southeast Asia. China is now primarily supplying competitively priced intermediate inputs and capital goods, plus all that new investment we just talked about.
Let's dig into the composition of that trade. Because what ASEAN is importing from China, that really reveals the nature of this cooperation.
It does. When you dissect the trade flows, the evidence is just compelling. More than 90% of ASEAN's imports from China are materials that are necessary to support the region's own domestic production.
So not finished goods that compete with local products?
Exactly. To break it down, about 60% are intermediate inputs, the parts, components, raw materials needed for assembly. And roughly 30% are capital goods.
Meaning machinery, equipment.
Right, machinery, factory equipment, technology used for building new factories, and modernizing the ones they already have. This is the complete opposite of an influx of competing consumer goods.
So China has become the indispensable provider of the very tools that Southeast Asia needs to build up its own manufacturing sector.
That's a perfect way to put it. China now supplies over 40% of all the capital goods imported by ASEAN. They've effectively displaced major historical partners like Japan, South Korea, Western Europe to become the region's largest source of industrial equipment.
It's like an economic fertilizer.
It is. This influx of competitively priced capital goods, it enables the rapid expansion and modernization of the region's own manufacturing base.
And the performance metrics, they seem to back this up. The data suggests that Chinese inputs are fostering genuine regional production, not just turning Southeast Asia into a passive assembly line.
You can see this very clearly in the global value chain, or GVC, performance data. Southeast Asia's gross GVC exports, so finished goods that use components from multiple countries, they've increased by a remarkable 73% since 2017.
73%. And how does that compare to China's own growth?
That's the crucial part. That 73% significantly outperforms the 54% increase that China saw over the same period.
Interesting.
This trend, it offers definitive proof that Chinese inputs are supporting and enabling accelerated regional production growth. It's allowing these economies to really capitalize on their GVC participation.
Okay, let's pivot from these high-level economic flows down to the ground level. I want to talk about the concrete physical impacts of this infrastructure model, looking at the accelerated connectivity, the economic corridors that are literally redrawing the map of Southeast Asia.
I think the transformation that's underway in Laos is probably the most powerful illustration of infrastructure as a development tool. I mean, for decades, Laos has been synonymous with being landlocked.
Right, constrained by mountains, no reliable transport.
And these China-backed projects are actively, physically working to turn it into a land-linked hub.
And the centerpiece of that entire transformation is the Laos-China Railway, the LCR.
The LCR is a core flagship BRI project, and it aligns perfectly with Laos's own national dream of becoming a modern transportation hub that connects the whole Indochina Peninsula, Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, Singapore.
And that was a monumental undertaking.
Oh, a huge civil engineering challenge. It cost approximately $6 billion, and Chinese contractors substantially financed 70% of those costs through various instruments.
So what is the practical day-to-day impact of an investment like that? How does it change life and business in Laos?
Well, just imagine trying to move goods or even just travel through the mountains of northern Laos before this railway. It was slow, it was costly, it was unreliable. You were mostly relying on trucks on bad roads.
It's a total bottleneck.
Totally. The LCR just dramatically reduces transportation costs and time. It instantly injects positive economic returns into one of the region's poorest nations.
Yes.
And the data shows its immediate vitality.
Right.
Through May 2022, so in a very short time.
Yeah.
Cumulative passenger transport reached 14.43 million people, and aggregate goods transport went past 20 million metric tons.
20 million tons.
With a cross-border freight value hitting $2.5 billion.
That is just a staggering amount of movement in such a short time. It means Laos is no longer isolated. It's now plugged into its neighbors, plugged into China. That creates a regional dynamism that was just impossible before.
Unsurprisingly, the railway has been officially praised as a symbol of prosperity and friendship. It really proves the direct developmental impact of this kind of BRI collaboration.
Okay, let's shift over to Cambodia. There we see a slightly different story, where the investment translates immediately into these tangible daily benefits for commerce and tourism, things that everyone in the population notices right away.
The Phnom Penh-Sihanoukville Expressway is a perfect, concise example of that immediate utility. Before this project, the critical journey from the capital, Phnom Penh, to the vital coastal city of Sihanoukville, that used to be a grueling 5 to 6 hour road trip.
And the new expressway.
It cut that journey down to just 2 hours.
So a 6-hour trip becomes 2. That does more than just save gas. It must create entirely new economic and social activities.
It does. It turns what was an overnight necessity into an easy single-day round trip. And that massive efficiency gain, it facilitates local tourism exponentially. Thousands of people from the capital can now visit the coast and be back in a single day.
And the connectivity goes beyond the physical roads, right?
It does. The BRI also actively promotes digital connectivity. In Cambodia, that supports cross-border trade and tourism by, for instance, encouraging Chinese tourists to spend more easily using QR code technology.
So integrating payment systems like WeChat and Alipay.
Yes, exactly. It modernizes financial transactions in the local economy almost overnight.
And looking forward, what are Cambodia's expectations for this partnership? Are they just looking for more of the same?
Well, Cambodia still has a huge demand for basic physical infrastructure, especially things like rural roads and bridges to connect its interior. But their expectations for future BRI projects are definitely evolving.
Evolving how?
They're looking for higher standards. They expect high labor standards to be maintained, a clear priority on transferring skills to local Cambodian workers, and an increased focus on the principles of green development. The partnership is maturing, and that requires ongoing adaptation.
All right, let's turn our attention now to a very strategic project. The China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, or CMLA. This feels like it goes way beyond simple bilateral trade. This is about securing a critical strategic access route.
CMEC is fundamentally about strategic resilience for China. The corridor is engineered to provide quick, reliable sea access for China's vast, landlocked western provinces, giving them a gateway to the Bay of Bengal.
And why is that access so vital?
Because it significantly reduces China's reliance on the Malacca Strait, which is not only one of the most congested shipping lanes in the world, but it's also a strategically vulnerable choke point.
So what are the main physical pieces that make up this corridor?
The two foundational components are the Kaohsiung Special Economic Zone, the SEZ, and its deep-sea port.
Right.
But critically, the corridor also incorporates existing, highly functional energy infrastructure.
The pipelines.
The Sino-Myanmar oil and gas pipelines. The gas pipeline has been operational since 2013, the oil pipeline since 2017. And these are absolutely essential for fueling the new industrial hub in China's internal Yunnan province.
So this is truly a dual-purpose project. It serves Myanmar's development, but at the same time, it advances a crucial domestic goal for China.
Absolutely. The broader goal is a comprehensive transport corridor, with plans for highways and high-speed railways linking Kyaukphyu on the coast all the way to Kunming via Mandalay. This directly supports China's long-standing domestic goal of narrowing the economic gap between its rich coast and its underdeveloped western provinces.
So CMS is an integrated solution for both regional and internal development needs.
That's right.
Now, we know the situation in Myanmar has been, well, highly disruptive, yet China seems to have shown this firm determination to keep these CMS priorities moving forward.
They've shown immense resourcefulness in ensuring continuity. Because of all the regional disruptions, China proactively opened new hybrid trade routes to bypass the problems.
What kind of routes?
Things like a new rail and road hybrid route connecting Chongqing to Linkhang and the Guangxi-Yangon New Maritime route. Even while facing instability in Myanmar, China has continued to push for the acceleration of key CMS projects. It shows an unwavering commitment to securing its long-term strategic interests.
Okay, so we've established the philosophy, the financial scale, and the tangible results of this model. This brings us to the big picture question. How are Southeast Asian nations really navigating this new geoeconomic landscape? Are they just passive players, or are they genuinely emerging as winners?
The data, I think, overwhelmingly indicates that Southeast Asia is acting as a strategic winner. They're actively capitalizing on global trade restructuring, particularly the tensions between the major economic powers.
You can see that resilience in their export numbers.
Remarkable resilience. ASEAN's total goods exports were 15% higher in October 2025 compared to the year before. And crucially, exports to the United States have just boomed.
And that's a direct result of supply chains shifting, right?
It's a direct cause and effect. Southeast Asian goods are replacing products that were previously sourced from China in the U.S. market. This substitution effect confirms that ASEAN economies are definite winners in this restructuring period. And countries like Vietnam and Thailand, they've led that surge with increases of about 30% in their U.S.-bound exports.
And this isn't just a fleeting trend, a temporary trade deflection. It seems to suggest a more durable long-term strength.
Exactly. The underlying strength is durable because the new foreign direct investment inflows into their manufacturing sectors remain incredibly robust.
So robust.
We're talking about approximately $75 billion annually in recent years. That sustained high-level investment, it demonstrates a profound long-term confidence from global manufacturers in the region's capacity and its future position in the global trade ecosystem.
This brings us back to that core fear, though. The concern that China will eventually dominate these new supply chains and that Southeast Asian nations will just be passive assembly hubs that capture very little of the actual value.
Right.
What does the value-added data tell us about who's really benefiting?
The value-added analysis is fundamental here. And while China's importance in the supply chains is definitely growing, it went from providing about 7% of the value add in 2010 to 13% in key GVC sectors by 2022. That share is still surprisingly modest in the overall picture.
So if China's providing 13% of the value, where's the rest of the economic benefit being captured?
It's staying local. Crucially, domestic production accounts for about 2/3 of the value contained in the region's exports, which confirms that these nations are not just assembly plants for Chinese parts. They are capitalizing on and benefiting deeply from their GVC participation. They're capturing the lion's share of the value from labor, logistics, and the final assembly.
And beyond that, the region isn't just relying on China for its manufacturing investment, is it? The data shows a pretty healthy diversification.
And that is a vital element of this landscape. If you compare the manufacturing FDI, the investment flowing in from America and its geopolitically aligned partners, so Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Western Europe, their combined investment still substantially outstrips China's.
What's the difference in scale?
Annually, these aligned partners invest roughly $50 billion compared to China's $19 billion. So this healthy diversification shows that Southeast Asia is consciously and strategically keeping multiple options open. They are not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Which gives them more leverage.
Much more leverage to navigate today's very complex trade environment.
So to wrap this all up, let's circle back to that original metaphor. The customer in the marketplace. The overwhelming appeal of this whole partnership model seems to be its simple, radical pragmatism.
It's entirely pragmatic. The primary factor driving countries toward this partnership is that China is offering technical support and funding that is uniquely tailored to Southeast Asia's most immediate and critical development need.
Which is large-scale infrastructure.
Large-scale infrastructure capacity building is the necessary prerequisite for any major leap in industrialization and modernization.
And the whole framework is secured by these larger institutional commitments, right? It goes beyond any single project.
The institutional architecture provides the security for long-term integration. You have frameworks like the China-ASEAN Free Trade Area, CAFTA, and the commitment to the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP.
The massive Asia-Pacific Trade Agreement.
Exactly. These agreements provide institutional guarantees for deeper, long-term economic integration. They lock in the benefits of the cooperation.
And finally, that focus on knowledge transfer we talked about earlier, it's delivering real, practical knowledge for sustainable growth.
Absolutely. The cooperation is hyper-focused on economic and technical outcomes. I mean, you have concrete examples like China establishing 20 experimental research stations to develop better crop varieties and 3 agricultural technology demonstration centers. This is tangible knowledge transfer that directly supports food security and sustainable agricultural growth.
This deep dive has really shown us the immense scale of this infrastructure investment model, the strategic alignment between China's own needs and ASEAN's growth goals, and the, verifiable, tangible improvements in connectivity. When you look at the evidence, whether it's cutting a 6-hour road trip down to 2 or transforming a landlocked nation into a regional hub with billions in freight value, the appeal of this development model is just crystal clear.
The central lesson here is that development in the 21st century is no longer achieved primarily through ideological crusades or conditional lectures. It's fundamentally driven by a mutual recognition that sustainable development and accelerated modernization are achieved through sustained large-scale economic cooperation. Southeast Asian nations are not passive recipients. They are sophisticated, active selectors, leveraging their position and choosing their partners in a diversified global marketplace to achieve their own critical national goals. Reviewing this evidence makes you realize that if infrastructure utility is now simply a commodity available from multiple vendors, it fundamentally changes the traditional power dynamic of the global development world.